Right, so yes, the little page here on the side is quite indicative. I actually printed that off the Times Higher Ed. It's one of the visuals they had there the other day, because the Times Higher Ed, as are other newspapers, are talking a lot now about what's happening in terms of gender inequality in various workplaces, and so therefore, to some extent, I'm giving you a broader analysis about what's happening to the university sector, and more specifically, obviously, with Australia, and then I'm going to talk about how that works out for women in terms of the nature of women's work, the responsibilities and other aspects. Okay, so, oh, hold on, I knew that was happening. Go back. Oh, okay. Right, so the project I'm working from is one that I've been going through for about 4 years. It's over now and I'm trying to complete the book. So this is some of the thoughts I'm putting up today is really trying to even contextualise that particular project, and so I'll be welcoming any responses from everyone here, any criticisms and comments. It was a 4-year research project. It looked at 3 university case studies in Australia, representative of the age and the status of the universities and location. The desktop studies were undertaken. We looked at the 4 universities in quite a bit of detail to do a discourse analysis, and we also looked at, for example, at the profile of senior managers. And if you notice that the project itself is called Leadership in the Entrepreneurial University, so we looked largely at leaders, but I saw leadership as being a mechanism through which to look at what was happening organisationally. It's a lens. It helps you have a focus, it justifies what you're doing. I'm actually highly critical of the notion of leadership, and in fact I'm totally anti-leadership. You'll probably come to get that sense. So it's ironic that I talk about it all the time. But the data, I interviewed vice-chancellors at these 3 universities. We went to talk to early and mid-career researchers, where are their futures, how do they see their futures, postdoctoral fellows, the next generation of leaders. I talked to human resource managers, diversity managers, they're now called instead of equal opportunity people, union representatives, and also to the people who do the searches for leadership positions. We call them the headhunters, okay, in the business, and that was quite an interesting one. So I then did, obviously, thematic analysis and working through it from a variety of issues, both looking at case studies, but across all 3 universities and more broadly. Okay, so this is my overarching look. I'm just working through this at the moment as I'm starting to write this book. It's really, to some extent, I'm using some of Bourdieu's work with a type of feminist reading of that, Liz Atkins' skids and Lois McNay's work. Because they do make a distinction between what they call here, it does make a distinction between what is called academic and intellectual capital, which I think has valid reasoning in this analysis. I'm also drawing from critical organisational theory, the work of Elvison around gender, Alison Pullen also from a feminist organisational theorist. Shinat, I can never say that, whatever, that one. Those who was Polish can help me. And critical university studies such as Wright, Sue Wright, and other feminist theories such as Fraser. So this particular paper, though, focuses what I talk about is twin strategies, the implications of twin strategies of managerialism and marketisation in terms of how they are fundamentally reconfiguring the nature and practices of academic work. And I consider the material and social and political conditions under which this is happening, and the very practical matters of everyday life, in particular for women. And so, drawing from another piece of work I've done with other colleagues at Deakin, we worked on the notion, because it is about the nature of work and the changing nature of work, we're drawing from the notion of the new contractualism that Annie Yateman wrote a quite important paper back quite a while. She advanced the notion of contractual personhood. And she said that she argues that as a way of understanding the way particular aspects of individuality enabled and emerged from ongoing relationships and how to resolve contracts. Now, she was quite positive about the fact that we're moving into, within the broader social contract between government and the individual, that we're going into more contractual type of relationships. But we tended to feel that it was a very narrow, individualistic way of looking at the nature of contractualism. And we argued that, in fact, what is happening more broadly within society as we are moving to the gig economy away from other forms of social welfare state is that contractualism or contractual relations of various types actually are embedded in everyday relationships, in everything that we're doing in terms of our workplaces. And we would argue that there's a most explicit assumption now being made in universities that academics must perform in particular ways and be loyal to their university in a type of paternalistic contract to the university. They must be loyal to the institution, although this loyalty is often not reciprocated because of the market contract, that is, you are only hired to do particular things in a particular way. And we would argue also that this type of precarity engenders certain conditions which engenders fear and distrust, which we talk about as relational contractualism. It's a relational contract. So underpinning all of this type of the relational contract is what I've often called about as the effective economy of an organisation, and in particular of the academy, which I think is now increasingly about desire, fear, envy, anger, passion, doubt, ambivalence. I can keep on going, contradiction. Sorry. Okay, so the types of contractualism that we talk about really in the everyday is around academic-student relationships. Now you probably as students and other academics know that you're constantly having to sign off on compliance regimes, you're having to you're being constantly monitored in terms of your relationship with your PhD students or other students in terms of expectations. There's codes of conduct that mobilise codes of ethics in research. There are peer relationships which are based largely often on a contractual basis in terms of what counts as merit, which is a pseudo type of contractual relationship. We also have a whole range of type of proceduralism upon which it operates, in which contractual relationships work. So in other words, how we work through promotions and how we do those types of things. And of course we have the manager-academic relationships in performance review situations, in workload calculations, and now increasingly the move towards more behavioural KPIs. This is happening. So all of these are what we call pseudo types of contractual, informal contractual relationships sometimes in many cases. Okay, so let me go to the Australian policy context for those who don't know that much about Australia. Apart from the fact that our politics is as bad here as it is in America and the USA, what more can I say? Policy here, though, equates, in terms of higher ed, innovation with science, very directly, in terms of priorities in research, and it devalues through that type of equation the humanities and the social sciences, okay? And I think that's pretty typical of what's happening in the States and here in the UK. There's a very intense demand for quality assurance because quality is what counts in international labour markets or international student markets, because to attract students into particular university sectors and countries, they need to have high quality education systems to do that. Also, increasingly graduate employability is another test of how good a system is. Then, of course, there's the adoption of research assessment, which unfortunately we followed Britain right down the UK, right down the line in terms of picking up a research assessment. Our first one was in 2010. We did it again in 2015 and again in 2018. So they're using research assessment to reinvigorate the old hierarchies between research-intensive universities and those that are not research-intensive or the teaching-only types of things. So this is the way the mechanism is working. Okay, so this is just a voice from a dean, a head of school, here in one of my three universities, an regional university. I think there's mixed messages on one hand. We've got the federal government, because we have a federal government, and we have 8 states and territories. Each of the states and territories has their own sector, but in higher education, it's run from the federal government directly. But not in schools, So you've got the federal government wanting to increase access and equity and that, and then on the other hand you've got state politicians, particularly in our field of teacher education, totally focusing on inputs, outputs, quality, A lot of it's based on anecdotal evidence rather than any hard facts about poor teacher quality. It's sort of falling apart the national scene. and we've got state governments telling us to do additional different things to work. This is just a classic case of what happens in a professional, something like the teaching, education, nursing, where there's strong pressures from the professions to tell us what to do, and increasingly so through accreditation processes. But the point he says is there's a whole lot of pressures and tension and how it plays out. So this is one element. But what we've got in higher ed in Australia is heightened precarity in work. Post-1989, they devolved what was a centralised wage bargaining system where strong unions could support weaker unions. Now that was broken down to enterprise bargaining, and enterprise bargaining means that each university has to have its union or whatever to justify or to argue the case and negotiate. So it's meant that the research-intensive universities, there's a better bargaining power for the academics there, so you're seeing a beginning of a gap happening between those universities and others. But there's a conclusion in Australia that we've got really weak wages growth because there have not been increases in salaries very much over the last 10 years. And in fact, now they see it's a problem, which I think is very ironic. You know, the neoliberal state has now come to eat itself because there's no economic growth. Why? Because we haven't had a wage increase over 10 years for the whole country. So now suddenly the economists go, oh, this is not a good thing. Okay. Also reduced reduction in expenditure on research in Australia, incredibly heavy reliance on international education. It's now the second largest export industry in Australia, education. We export everything, in schooling, you name it, certification, curriculum, assessment. We export it and we earn billions on it. And we find that of course means teachers have got to do a whole lot more work. Our full-time student load has increased, it trebled in the 1990s, and since 2000 it has now gone and increased again by 85.5%, and only staff ratios have not increased in the same ratio. And also, if you have a look at the third last point, at the numbers of casual employees, that's increased by 56.3%. And now limited term contracts have increased by 83.4%, full-time estimated casuals by 77.9%, and the tenured people who do teaching and research have only increased 39.5%. So as the numbers have been increasing, the numbers of tenured staff have been reducing. So of that, of the casuals, they grew 52.8%, which is twice the rate of the limited term tenured and the tenured people. And a lot of the limited contract people are people in the upper echelons of the academy on big money, really big money, okay? So, think about that. 27 of the nation's 42 universities have rates of casualisation exceeding 40%, some up to 60%. So, you can go into a faculty of science in one of the top universities and 80% of the staff are either casual contract. Okay, this is the gig economy I'm talking about, okay? Right, so I'm arguing here then that the new contractualism really is a way of trying to think through some of this, because I thought it seemed to be valid about what we were arguing. With 65% of most academics on either casual or on contract, we've seen also a heightened tension between academics and line managers, and I'll explain that a little bit later. And so there has been a shift, I want to argue, in this paper, in emphasis from what I call the gift economy of a university to the gig economy. So, what is a gift economy? A gift economy, which sort of preceded the monetary-based economy, is where individuals work collaboratively or share knowledge, ideas and goods with the assumption of reciprocity, because it is the ethical, professional thing to do and may contribute to the wider public good. The gift economy is based on trust, and the gift is unconditional. The focus is on the gift and not monetary value. It is about gifting something or time freely and for free. So I'm using that as a notion to think about it, because I felt to me that this is what when I started academic work 35 years ago, this seemed to be a little bit about what we used to do in lots of ways. So, I'm going through a lot of detail here, but I was trying to argue the case here is that we not only do we do the teaching, which is about developing coursework as well as preparing for lectures, putting them online, assessing papers, moderation teams, leading course teams, checking for cheating now, you have to do progress reports, etc., help kids with progress. It's all comes down data analytics, learning analytics comes down and tells you have to check these students because they haven't responded on their online environment. You know, you have these multiple tasks. So my argument is that there's now an intensification of labour occurring in the academy. There's also escalating expectations, maintaining the quality of what they're doing constantly, feed student evaluations. There's accountability regimes that, as I said, you've got these incredible accreditation processes, external demands put on academics, compliance demands within the university around audit culture, around financial matters, back to credit card, etc. You've got speeding up. The funding levers are now giving you shorter and shorter time frames, 2 weeks to put in a tender sometimes, and we're meant to go out and get money, earn income, and to do research with partners, and you might have 2 weeks to write a tender. The digital demands, multimodality, the turnaround response rates have suddenly got worse, 724 expectations. You're meant to do flipped classrooms. To keep up to date with the technology, it's constant upskilling. You might use it a month ago and then you have to redo it the next month, and they're always fixing it up when you try to redo it. Emotional labour. The domestic work of care, particularly for international students, is increasing. There's technological dumping of all the administrative work onto academics. We do absolutely everything with absolutely no administrative support anymore. The servicing of proliferation of committees, because now we have a proliferation of people up the top and each one of them has a set of committees. So all of this is happening. Integrating new policy imperatives. With every new PVC, Pro Vice Chancellor up at the upper echelons, they have another new strategy, another policy thing that we all have to pick up and take off. So this is the intensification of labour. So this is one of the managers himself, and I'm saying that contract people at all levels on contract, not just at the lower levels. A head of school, he said there's expansion of the job at the same time as being casualised and expectations, and the administrative are being pushed certainly into schools here, and I'm sure it's pretty universal that when I say schools, I mean academics. Doing all the administrative work that was kind of central administrative work. We as universities deal with that space as well. So here he is trying to say, the head of school, how he tries to manage all of that, at the same time keeping an eye on what the future is. So he's trying to think forward about that. But he says he finds it very little time to actually do that type of strategic thinking or policy thinking. Okay. We also give time and expertise to research. In addition to researching and writing for publications, we give a lot of labour to people who make a lot of money. Okay? We give a huge amount of labour. You think about it. Peer review. Doing peer review is for journals that then go off and make money. Okay? The journals are run by big publishers, multinational publishers. Sometimes have 2 to 3 journals for every article, sometimes 5. You've got the editorial work, the special issues, encyclopedias, handbooks, whatever. Getting grants, we're meant to go out and get very high status grants. At the same time, we're expected to do tenders with industry partners. Takes success rates 18%. Spend a huge amount of time doing that. Meant to develop and mentor and bring in large research teams, develop BCRs, bring them into large research teams. You go to seminars to support them and those types of things. You contribute to the research field and various research committees. I just met someone at one of the conferences and she said she just read 420 papers, reviewed them for our latest Excellence in Research Assessment program. So she does this, and the university does not recognise any of this. Our university, all the universities in Australia, this does not count all of this type of work. Conference attendance, we usually have to pay for a lot of it. University gets a reputation distinction out of all of this in terms of its rankings, because you're out there, you're doing the work, and the managers get their KPIs and get a bonus, and the academics, if we're lucky, might get a book from a publisher if we do a review. So, pardon my sarcasm, but it's an increasingly type of gifting relationship. And this particular quote comes from a study that was done also, similar to mine, about how respondents were highly conscious around the excellence in research assessment task. They had prompted a shift in publishing behaviour to meet often competing demands of individual research institutions, the institution, the discipline, and the international research community. So if I, as we all decide to publish, we have to say, well, we have to publish in a Q1, Q2 journal, but then also we're expected to publish to inform professional practice out, say, in the school sector, or in any other equivalent sector that you might be working in. And so the experience of the researchers up to this time has been to abandon journal banking. There was a big debate about whether we'd have journal banking. It got abolished in the ERA assessment, but all of the universities have kept it. So they said it's not a good thing to do, but every university says you have to publish in a Q1, Q2 journal. And so basically we have this incredible contradictory pressures to have impact on practice, but also publish in these particular journals. Okay. This is another dean, female dean. She was talking about what was happening with the research assessment practice. Teaching focus sometimes calls teaching only. Positions are being created for different reasons. So she's talking here about the fact that you're getting more and more teaching only positions and more research only positions, but all of them on contract or on casual labour. And there's shrinking of the teaching and research group. But what it does is it allows the university, in our system in Australia, everyone in a field so if they decide to put education up, education goes up, and anyone who writes or puts something into an education journal is counted in our education. It's not like we can pick some stars. So what happens is that we are here differentiation, so people are encouraged to become teaching only, which means they don't get counted. So if people don't publish a lot, they get pushed into teaching only, and usually at an early career stage. And well, we know what happens to women. They'll be in this caught in this bind in an early career stage where they make choices. It might be suitable for them when they're quite young, with a young family maybe, to go into the teaching only, but it's very hard to get into the teaching and research and to get into research only. So it's a set of pathways that have been set up now that have huge equity implications. So we have, as a consequence of all of what I've spoken about, this intensification of labour, the increasing scope, because of the breadth now we have to deal with, doing partnerships, raising money, being out there, being on the media, social media, a very big thing. We all have to be in the media now. All of these things has increased the scope. We've got the intensity and depth that we're required to do in terms of quality work, and the scale. We're now expected to be international. So you've got a whole new ways in which the work has been reconfigured. And of course, in all of this, there's a belief that you can work 7/24. We're all of our Australian universities are meant to run on 37.5 hours. 37.5 hours. We come to a halt if it's stopped. So what we know is that it's really probably about 50 to 60 hours is the average academic week. So what does this mean for women? Well, it means that academic mothers usually are disadvantaged in numbers of ways. They lack the mobility. They, in the same way, they lack the flexibility. In terms, they get one form of flexibility. They can work at home, or they can come in and out when they want. But their time is totally consumed because you can sit anywhere and feed a baby and do your work. So it's a very interesting thing. So there's just a whole lot of stuff going on now in a lot of the Times Higher Ed. I just picked this up the other day. I just thought similar types of issues going on here and in America. And indeed, it's not that academic mothers work less, they just work longer hours and do more housework at the same time, so they have less sleep, obviously. And this is, that's probably not as relevant. And there's another one, this came from Australia, where we found that when the research assessment came into being in Australia in 2010, the first one, immediately one academic, she did a really interesting analysis. And what she shows here is how in the top group of 8, it's the same as the Russell group here in the UK, in our top research intensive universities, which are all the old established ones that have been around since the 1850s, and so therefore very research intensive, very lots of science, engineering, other things. As you can see here, that all of the 2010, the numbers of women in these tenure positions suddenly started to drop. So it's quite an interesting, you say, well, what's happening? Well, they're recruiting more men to bring them into positions as well, because they're trying to improve their research assessment situation. At the same time, a lot of women, we actually now know, were leaving science and dropping out of science. So we have a major issue around this in Australia. This is just an argument really, I won't go into any detail here, but I'm arguing that academics also do other work than what I've just described. We gift ourselves to the community. We're all on all these boards outside, we're on various committees, we're advocates for the field that we're working in, we try to talk to policymakers about the field, we put in submissions to government, we promote the field, we organise conferences, etc. We share our expertise with the community through keynotes, and for the senior academics, you actually then have to go into a whole lot of other things around mentoring and other things. And so none of these activities are recognised in workload allocations in the Australian system. Okay. And of course now they're wanting us to move not just from high quality, they're wanting us now to measure impact as here in the UK. So again, we've just picked up the same impact work and it's being replicated here in Australia. Okay, so this is a dean, I think a female dean. Yes, all this is happening at the same time, so there are multiple agendas. Engagement is the big one, so we didn't have an Office of Engagement before, an Office of Engagement, I guess, where, and then they've also brought in teaching quality, now, TEXA, and saying what we have to do, and all the work that's flowing our way in this regulatory environment. So, as this head of school says, it's just almost head spinning at the pace at which it comes without what we perhaps had assumed in the past in terms of the resources, and we don't get any support at all. You know, the shift from quantity to quality, and conversations around the teaching research nexus around how you teach is focusing on position, is greater differentiation occurring, as I said, between teaching only and research. Okay. So for academics, and for women in particular, it's no longer, this is Horacek, a wonderful cartoonist from Melbourne. I use her cartoons a lot. Yes, so it's no longer possible, when I first started, you could actually stack your desk up and put that here, put that there, and you forget after a while that would drop off and you just take home what you wanted. But no, but in a sense, here is a classic case, is you cannot, to go home is no safe haven anymore in terms of your work. But what also is happening in Australia is, and I think again in most universities, is the argument is in this really volatile environment where if, say, for example, something happens in the international education field, our universities really shudder because it has a huge impact. So the Vice-Chancellors all argued when I interviewed them, we have to be nimble. It's a wonderful word, I thought, nimble. Okay, so to be nimble, what does to be nimble mean? Well, this is what it means. What it means is that there's more centralised control, more centralised decision making. They've set up parallel committees, parallel to the academic board, which is, I don't know whether you call it the Senate or the governing bodies of the university now, where academics do the curriculum and do the quality stuff. Well, now we have two committee systems, and one is the line management of the executive, down through to the head of school, or department head in your case, down through the dean, and on the other hand, you've got the quality being done. So we're doing the domestic work. The academics are allowed to do the domestic work of the university, keeping it all, cleaning it up, making it all nice, so that type of thing. And if you look at what is happening to, even as women are moving up into leadership, you're actually seeing the gender division of labour being reinvented again. So where do they go when they become a Pro-Vice Chancellor or a Deputy Vice-Chancellor? Well, they go into, guess what? Teaching and learning. Mm-hmm. Are they in research? No. If they are in research, where's their background? Science. So there's not a single person from humanities or social sciences who is one of our DBCs in 41 universities. They're all from science. So, and of those, probably about 10% of women. So that's a real indicator of what counts and what matters and who's in those jobs. Women, of course, chair all the internal committees, cleaning everything up, around into the corners and all. So we've got this gender division of labour reinvented, and in a report in 2017, you can see here, over half of all the universities have gender balanced boards. The chancellors are overwhelmingly male. The women are chairs of some committees. 25% of them are vice-chancellors, but we've got a whole 8 universities looking for vice-chancellors at the moment, so I bet that might drop. 1/3 of Vice Chancellors, executive or senior teams are women, but the women are, as I said, academic board chairs or in teaching and learning or in the faculty positions such as education. So that's a paternal contract being maintained in a sense through that type of relationship. And if you look who's on the glass escalator going up to the top, well, the Vice Chancellor, as I said there, if you look at the academic, there's a 44 in academic, which is the teaching and learning, and only 31% in DBC, and you can see only 36% in research, and then it even reduces for who manages the university, where all the money is on the management side. So, what I've described is, when I talked about the gift economy, is that really much of the work we've described is invisible to most of the people in the university. Okay? They don't know, most people don't know what an academic does. The non-academics, including the managers and administrators around us, as well as the students, take note when academics are not in their office, are off campus, travelling, not responding to emails immediately, or not completing compliance checks, and are often assumed we're just off task. You know, we're off having a good time. You know. Most are writing and reading for research, and travel has to be done quite often in personal and recreational time. But the implicit unwritten exchange or contract with the employer on which the gift economy worked in the 20th century university was the higher level of autonomy that academics had relative to other professions as to when, where, and how they undertook their work, and the capacity to decide within reason what they thought was important to do other than meeting all of their commitments as required. In a sense, they were the first flexible employee because of that type of relative level of autonomy. And my argument has been is that autonomy is shrinking because of what I've just described. And that's what came through my study. Most academics talk about deprofessionalisation, lack of autonomy, no power to have any say in decision making. Okay. My argument is that academic work requires a certain level of sociality, and this is a part of the gift economy. And Erickson, who was the good academic supervises, teaches and encourages students without hesitation and does her best even when she's asked to teach courses she's tired of or uninterested in. She organises workshops and conferences, reads and comments upon draft manuscripts. I'll let you keep on reading because I'll have the best of the drink. So he's making the same point about this is not acknowledged, not recognised, about the amount of time that is used doing this type of gifting about labour. So I'm talking about here the relational contract of the gift economy. It's based on goodwill, collegial trust and the freedom to profess. Jill talks about the gift economy as a system of redundant transactions in the moral economy that reinforce social relationships and the relational networks that make up communities. But it's also largely dependent and often linked to the notion, as I said, of academic freedom and intellectual leadership. But the one is linked to the notion of responsibility to others. And I've used some of my father's work here around. He makes similar comments when he talks about intellectual leadership. And he also talks about the other side of academic freedom is the responsibility that you have to then think about the needs of others and effects of one's actions, and you have to some extent always be prepared to do that type of gifting of labour. So there's this fine balance that I think has been shifting over this last 15 to 20 years. As the gig economy has emerged, as I've described elements of the gig economy, it's an environment in which temporary positions are common and organisations contract with independent workers for short-term engagements, but who are not treated as employees. Although that's changed with a recent nothing decision has happened. But there's a spread of formal contractualism with this casualisation, offshore campuses and other things, outsourcing. So we start making the case that when you outsource responsibility for things, who's responsible for equity? Who's responsible when you subcontract to subcontract? Who's responsible for the labour relationships, the pay, what people get paid? And I think there's a lot of offloading of responsibility by the university because there's a lot of outsourcing that they do. The argument that a lot of economists put is that this is because this is a new type of worker of the 21st century, okay? You want to be flexible. You want to build a portfolio career. You're quite happy to go up and move into a job and take a contract position, then move sideways into another job, build up your experience, develop your profile and work onwards. To some extent, I would argue that's very much the notion of how Silicon Valley might have worked and certain occupations. But I think when I talk to a lot of the early career researchers, people who just finished postdoc fellows, someone who'd been on a postdoc fellowship for 9 years, they just said, I'm over it. I just want to get out of here. If I don't get a 10-year job, I'm going to go into private industry. I'll get more money, and I just need to buy a house. I want to buy a house and sit down with a family. Okay. So I would argue that, of course, this notion of the portfolio career of doing your gig is not particularly good for women, because we know that institutional flexibility is going to, as I've argued, casualisation of contracts, it increases precarity of academic labour, and this is just a summary of what I've already talked about, really. It's the intensification of the workload that's going on, with increased scope and scale and intensity, the unbundling, teaching research only, the upskilling, the fact that everything we do is now recorded according to the amount of money we do it with, so an economisation of everything we do. And not surprisingly, there's a whole lot of recent studies starting to look at academic work relative to other professions, and they're actually finding that academics have high levels of stress and those in health, which is the highest of all occupations. And I remember doing an interview with a DVC, a Deputy Vice Chancellor, who's like second up from the Vice Chancellor who runs the university, and she was unbelievably emotional. She got very upset in the interview. It was like too therapeutic in a way, because I was asking her questions that she found incredibly difficult to talk about, because she found it so difficult to be in this particular job. So it's stressful for people at the bottom, it's equally stressful for some people at the top, but not all. So this is just a female lecturer talking around how she finally gained a continuing position after 20 years. 4 children. She went on probation. It's a 3-year probation after she's already been teaching basically for 20 years, but because she got into a tenured position, they put her on probation. So that means they can just sack her at any time anyway. So it's a bit ironic. How long do you have to teach before you're a good teacher? Okay, so I have multiple examples of this, and down the bottom is, I just want to teach the students well and do the research well. So in a sense, what's going on here is that all of the academics I spoke about the passion they have for what they're doing, the passion for teaching, the passion for their work, and ironically, in a way, that is what universities rely on heavily, is that sociality, the passion, the relationships we value, that is being really exploited. That emotional labour, that passion for what we do is being exploited by the academy because they know we won't not do it. They know we won't not mark that PhD that's coming because that student needs to finish to get a job. They know we won't not, look after a distressed student, and not help out an international student who really needs assistance. So there's a heavy reliance on that. This is interesting, because it was interesting. So I was wondering whether this is a professor who actually came from the UK, and he was recruited into humanities in the regional university I studied. And he said this, so I'll just let you read it for a minute. So again, it's at all levels that all people are feeling under surveillance, feeling under pressure. And I would argue also that at all levels, in the professoriate down, there's a feeling of disenfranchisement for any capacity to inform policy or various practices as well. So this is, he was quite surprised when he arrived to find this feeling that, because we think we're getting a lot of bad things from the UK. But he was quite surprised even relative to that. And unfortunately what happens in Australia is every system of education, in higher education, it works differently, it's funded differently, but these policies travel. And it has a completely different set of repercussions in some sense, and some things look similar in patterns, but other things don't. And we unfortunately look to the USA and to the UK and look at the worst aspects of both and impose them in Australia, in the system. So it's quite an interesting thing here about his response. I also argue that there is something that I've called institutional bullying. And to me, institutional bullying is through what he's talking about to some extent. It's this patterns of surveillance. Because as an academic, we have multiple forms of surveillance. We have student evaluations, we're evaluated on the publications we do, we have performance reviews, we have, it's quite interesting that there's so much surveillance of academics. But my question always is back to managers. I don't see any of this evidence about what you do, and I actually cannot track what you do, and you can put my name into the online and you know everything I do, but I never know what you do in terms of your time and work. So it's not mutual accountability, it's a one-way up accountability. And so this guy was just a new head of school, and he was already told virtually, well, just don't relax, you could be moved on reasonably quickly. Okay. Another is the female lecturer whose contract was about to finish, but she wanted to stay, so she went on to postdoc fellowship for 3 years out of desperation. She really wanted to teach, but she went into research. Yes, it's teaching, I think it's very much student-oriented, like students have in a way little too much input to my liking, because we are a business and we're financially dependent. It feels sometimes that students are putting a fair bit of pressure on the lecturer if they don't like the lecturer, or it's too difficult. So in a sense, sorry, I'll go back to the answers. So this institutional bullying is becoming quite evident. And again, the NTU, the union for the universities that has both professional and academic staff in Australia, they've just done a survey, and they have shown how what came through was this stuff about the institutional bullying, about how student evaluations are used to name and shame lecturers, how they're abusive, they're misogynist, how they often talk about a lecturer's looks, how they are. There's multiple examples. Again, I looked at the THE while I've been here the last week, and there's again lots of articles there about the types of abuse of women and people who are not white, So white males are pretty well protected, they still get away with a lot, whereas anyone else, the other, gets totally scrutinised and totally critiqued on a whole range of ways, everything from the bodily appearance right through to their, regardless of what they do. Okay. And what was also interesting around this is that there's a whole new thing that Vice Chancellors love for making it cheaper, is the whole notion of changing the spatiality of the university. So there's a whole move in Australia to have flipped classrooms, to have new spaces for students, gorgeous student places, so to allow the students to work anytime, wherever they want to, in very comfortable environments. So some of the newest buildings I went to when I went to these 3 universities, and including in my own, I'd walk into this fantastic space, terrific cafes, coffee, you name it, students lolling all over the place. And then I'd go up a lift and I'd go into a space and there'd be a glass door and you'd have to have a tap, something to get into it. So first you'd have no access to the academics without appointment. And when you got in there, most of the academics were on hot desks and there's no conversation because people said you can't talk. And then the professors or associate professors might have little glass boxes, all inside, no open, no air, no... So a lot of people I interviewed said, look, I'm only here today for the interview because I can't work in this tiny glass box that has a desk, a chair, no bookshelves anymore, because you don't need a bookshelf, you've got a computer. So it's a very, I call it the marginalisation through spatialisation that's going on, because this is exactly how academics feel. They feel as though they're being marginalised in multiple ways, and this is just another example of it in these buildings. I'll probably have to resign or retire or something like that when I get a good hot desk in my space. I'm such a noisy person. Okay, so all of this has an impact on decisions. I can go in terms of all of these decisions here are having an impact obviously on women, the choices they make, how they see whether they have a choice or not, Many going only into the teaching-only positions, many going into research management positions. They have a doctorate, but they decide to move into management because there's greater tenure there in management. Many moving into what some people call the third space, which is sort of like learning analytics, instructional design, a whole new policy work. There's a whole new group of staff now coming into the academy, and so many are moving into that where they don't either do teaching or research only, but they do combinations. But most said the work-life conflict is overwhelming, and again, I looked at the Times Higher Ed, it came out again, just as I was travelling, and again, they say that most academics feel stressed and underpaid, and that academic women in particular still do more housework and childcare than academic men. So there's enough data now to show this, and this is some of their data that I pinched off the side. So if you have children, how much of the childcare do you do compared to your partner? As you can see here, male academics are over the left, none, in the blue. And if you go to the right, you can see the red, which is the female academics doing far more work in childcare compared to their partner. Over here, most or all. So about half, right through, is largely the women doing most of the childcare. If you notice, there's a difference between the male and female professionals, which is quite interesting as well, I thought, in terms of the differential labour that goes on in the home. With the male professionals doing absolutely none, or pretty much none, compared to the female professionals, which I thought was quite interesting. So we often talk about, a motherhood citation penalty, what happens when you take on motherhood and how that leads to a citation penalty in terms of it, whereas male researchers actually get a boost when they have a young family. Okay, so in this effective economy, the Times Higher Ed survey showed that there's a difference between how professional staff and academic staff felt about their work, that both sought reduced workload, but academics sought more autonomy and they wanted to have reduced workplace stress. So they had higher levels of stress and they felt more deprofessionalised, whereas the professional staff in the university felt more as though they had been more professionalised as a consequence of these shifts that are happening. Because they do a lot of administrative work that it has something to do with us, but they certainly are not there to support us. They do a lot of compliance work. And this is a typical trend across most countries. I've just cited some examples there. And the basic stress factors were reduced autonomy, lack of role clarity, lack of support, work relationships, and a lack of say in decision making. So, of course, gender is a major issue throughout all of this, and in terms of depression and other emotional aspects, it certainly is impacted more on women. Okay, so what I've been arguing is really that you're seeing these cultural shifts around happening, particularly with the notion of what's happening internally within the academy as universities are rejigging their workplace and really the restructuring of how work is done. More compliance, less speaking out, a general lack of respect, many feel, for intellectual leadership, an audit culture, and lack of processes, how people feel they could change something. And we had a professor ask a question in faculty board, which is one of the committees of our academic board, and she said, how do we go about getting something to change with regard to some policy that's made that we disagree with, what processes can we go through? And the dean said, oh, faculty board's not the place for that. And she said, well, where do I go? Do I go to someone? Do I go to you? And then the dean said, oh, well, I don't have much power. I just go up and it's all decided at the corporate level, and then the heads of school decide how the workloads work. Total, absolutely refusal to accept any responsibility. So my question was, excuse me, why do we have an executive dean? To which there was extreme dead silence for quite a while. Because, the question is, where do we go? Even professors feel in that same way, marginalised. Externally, though, I think we've got some new things are happening. I think this is where it starts to really worry me. That not only are we silenced within the academy, but at the same time we're expected to go and perform publicly in the media and to go blogging and do all those other things. it's a post-truth era where my opinion is equivalent to any expert's opinion or expertise. And I think that we're seeing academic expertise at universities are now being challenged, and definitely conservative groups see universities as hotbeds of leftist thinking, which of course they haven't been for many years. That in particular, feminist and LGBTQT scholars are targeted online with vitriolic and misogynist and homophobic abuse. The university does not prepare us for it, it doesn't help us, it doesn't support us, and indeed, when we had one of my young colleagues who used the word phallic stupidly in the title of turned out stupidly, in the title of one of her papers. Now, while the paper wasn't accessible to the public, this group of quite organised guys just started to attack her online, and it was just unbelievably abusive, using the C word. It was just horrific what she went through in terms of the abuse, because she used the word phallic in the title of the paper. So there's organised right-wing, I have to say largely white males out there who feel disenfranchised, and they are prepared to take on anyone who seeks to be different. And the NTU survey showed that as well. So I just had to get this one up. I thought it was a good night. You all be just talk about ballast. Someone said to me after what happened to the Simmons, what someone sent out around, and it's like, well, aren't we all admiring anyway? So some argue there's existential unravelling. So basically, I'll just finish in a minute. Okay. We see you have an academic community heavily emotionally invested in what we do, and where a lot of people feel threatened in terms of academic identity and research and in a sense of self. And yet we have this incredible emotional commitment that people have to what they do, and in a sense in terms of being responsible for public funding and how they use public funding, but also to their students and their colleagues. Okay. So what we're seeing, I think I'm arguing, is that we've got an economisation, with a gig economy, we've got an economisation, this is a term that Nancy Fraser, Wendy Brown uses, economisation of social relations. The best university scholars are characterised as entrepreneurial and investment savvy, not simply by obtaining grants and fellowships, but by generating new projects and publications from old research, calculating publication and presentation venues, and circulating themselves and their work according to what will enhance their value. The pressure for academics to network to improve both their professional and university capital comes in this context a way of attracting investors rather than as a collegial process of knowledge building and sharing. So, and certainly I know as an editor of journals, as with other editors of journals, it is incredibly hard now to get people to do the peer reviewing of a journal. And indeed now if you're on an editorial board, as I am quite a few, they make you actually review papers, otherwise they kick you off the board. So, but in general, the next generation coming through say we don't have time to do these peer reviews, but they want to be published in those journals. So there's this interesting shift going on in terms of this lack of a sense of the gifting. Okay. Oh, sorry, wrong way. Okay. So I'm just making the same point. Okay. I'm just going to go on. So there's still white male, heterosexual and right wing. This is the people who are running Australia at the moment. Conservative hub of men up there in Parliament. And they are actually running Australia because they are bullying the current Prime Minister to take quite right-wing things, but I think this is equally still evident across most universities to some extent, or across the sector. But here's horror check again. I'll finish with her.